Welcome back, and just want to take a moment. To introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Nicole Morock, and the title of her talk is "Evolution of a Ghost Hunter: From Fear to Fascination." Nicole, or Nikki, is a lifelong student of the unsolved and the unexplained. She is an area ghost hunter and the author of several paranormal-based books. Tonight, she plans to give us a hallowed evening, sharing some of her most interesting paranormal experiences since her childhood. These experiences led her to join a paranormal investigation group, the National Society of Paranormal Investigation and Research, or NSPIR. That's based in Raleigh. She's been with NSPIR for 12 years, and she's now the vice president. Nicole is also the creator, producer, and publisher of the PEEP podcast, PEEP. It stands for People Experiencing Everyday Paranormal. She's also the author of 2 paranormal-themed novels and the nonfiction book, Please Don't Call Me a Psychic, Stories from My Paranormal Life. All these books are available on Amazon, and her most recent book features lessons learned from a decade of her investigations with NSPIR. We believe Nikki's presentation will fascinate you and get you in the mood for the spooky season coming up, and real-life tales of haunted places and people. One of her goals is to inspire you to become more observant of your surroundings and look at experiences that could be paranormal with a perspective that balances between belief in the supernatural and healthy skepticism. So please now sit back and prepare to enjoy the fascinating presentation from Nikki Morock. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you, Smith. Thank you for that introduction, Michael. Thank you for that centering. I'm so happy to be joining everybody today, and I am going to share my screen and get this rolling. Yes. Just a quick check, Smith, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you. So tonight, the name of my talk is Evolution of a Ghost Hunter: From Fear to Fascination. And I titled it this because truly my life has gone from absolute fear and terror as a child to in adulthood, a fascination with all things paranormal, not just ghosts, but anything from UFOs to near-death experiences and everywhere in between. So I have gone from terror and fear to fascination. I'm going to give you just a few childhood experiences that kind of explain the whole fear thing, and then a turning point that happened when I was a teenager. I'll go into early adulthood, and then in my mid-30s, I met the group called NSPIR, the National Society of Paranormal Investigation and Research, and hooked up with them and started doing investigations. So I'll share some investigative stories and some electronic voice phenomena, which I am hoping that you'll be able to hear and answer. What do you hear? And then I'll just summarize how my perspective has changed and how it continues to change. And then, like Smith said, after the break, we'll take questions and answers. So starting with absolute fear, this is a picture of me and my little brother, Greg. We lived in a house that my parents called the greenhouse at this point. I was about three and a half at this age, and my brother was just beginning to walk and doing a little bit of talking. I have an older sister who's 4 years older than I am. And after we moved out of this house, I ended up with a younger brother as well. So I'm the second of 4 children, and I'm the sensitive one. Although I think in the early years of his life, Greg was sensitive too, but he's one of those children who blocked it out. And I'll tell you why. When we lived in the greenhouse, which was called that because it was painted green, Um, my earliest memories of being afraid was having a recurring nightmare there of dinosaurs eating my family, which seems like maybe for that age it would make sense, but I don't think I'd ever actually learned anything about dinosaurs yet. So it was kind of strange, and it was a recurring nightmare. And that's kind of a big deal for me because I, at least before or after that, but as far back as I can remember, I don't have nightmares unless I'm living in a place or sleeping in a place that has activity. So it wasn't just me, though. It was my brother as well. Greg would stand up in his crib and scream in the middle of the night. And when my mom would rush in to see what was going on, the few words that he could say were man in room. He would wake up, see a man in his room, and scream until somebody came in to get him and turn the lights on. And I have vague memories of that, but that's the story that my mom has always told us. And as far as I know, until we lived in the scary house, that was about all the experiences Greg had had. But I continued to have experiences. Um, I am an empath, which I understand now what that means. But as a child, it just meant that I would be completely overwhelmed by both emotional and physical sensations of other people. And so you can imagine, as a young child going into a nursing home, there is a lot of pain and fear and sadness and loneliness, at least the ones that my mom would take us to visit her aunts and uncles who were getting on in age back then. Um, so I would feel like somebody was watching me, even if we were walking down a hallway with all the doors closed and there was nobody there to watch me. And when we were sitting in the room visiting my great aunt, I would get very just fidgety. And that's not me. I was always kind of the calm, quiet child. And I couldn't stand to be in there. I would get fidgety. I'd start acting up. And finally, I remember one time my mom sent me and my sister outside to play because she just couldn't handle how bothersome I was being. And the minute I walked out, I was fine. I was totally cool and happy memories of playing outside. I am the same way in hospitals. And unfortunately, that means that I didn't visit my mom a lot at work because she was a nurse for 45 years. And going into hospitals, similar feelings, the sensation that I was being watched, even though there wasn't anybody visibly watching me, and just a lot of overwhelming emotions and occasionally physical pain. So I did what I could, and still as an adult do what I could to avoid going to the hospital. But of course, once you're an adult, you can't always avoid that. So at least now I know how to kind of take care of myself in those situations. So when I was 16, we moved from Mississippi up to Raleigh, and I handled the move okay for a 16-year-old girl who was being, in my mind, torn away from all of the people I'd grown up with. And I was excited because my dad had been working here for a few years before we moved up here. He was in broadcasting and he was always chasing the next best market, which is what a lot of broadcasters do, especially if they're evening anchors or in management, like news director. And by the time he got up here, he was news director. And so he looked around and, Raleigh's a nice place. Let's just go ahead and settle in Raleigh. So he had us sell the house down there and move up here. And he knew he wanted to buy a house up here, but he wasn't sure where yet. He really hadn't done a lot of looking, and the city was growing so much because this was in 1990. He decided, give mom a chance to get up here, get us settled, and then they would decide where to live after that. So we rented a house for a year. And the day that we arrived, I remember mom driving us kids behind the truck. We pulled into the driveway of this house. It was an okay house, mid-century, like nothing special about it. It wasn't a big Victorian, scary looking house. It was just a house in Quail Hollow, you know. Um, so we started unloading the truck before we even went inside to look around. Mom was like, if you're going in, take a box. So she handed me a box and I said, okay, fine. And I went to step across the threshold into the house. And as soon as I crossed the threshold, I literally backed out. I took 2 steps back. I turned around. Mom was right there. I said, I can't live here. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, I can't live here. I couldn't explain what was going on, but it was the most frightening feeling I'd ever had in my life after a childhood of being afraid of everything. So I was just like, I can't, there's something wrong here. I can't live here. And she said, what would a parent do? Right. She said, well, we've signed the lease and we're living here for a year. So turn around and take the box inside. So I went inside and we unloaded everything. The first couple of days were spent getting the kitchen in order, getting the bathrooms in order. It was a split level house. So when you first walk in, that's where the level with the kitchen and the living room. And then if you go downstairs, there was my brother's bedroom, my baby brother's bedroom, uh, the washer and dryer room with a half bath, and the den, which is where we put the TV and had cable. Um, we had a black and white TV in the kitchen, which is what we used to play Atari on. And then upstairs were my bedroom, Greg's bedroom, and my parents' bedroom. My older sister had already long moved out and went to work at Disney World, so she didn't make this move with us. So the second night there, my bedroom had not been set up yet. So I'm still surrounded by boxes and I'm sleeping on a mattress in the middle of the floor. And again, we'd only been there 2 days. So we'd taken care of my brother's rooms and the main living areas, and my room was next, and then my parents' room would be after that. So we had a scheme, we had a plan going on. And in the middle of the night, I felt a strong yank of my hair on top of my head, like right up here. And obviously that woke me up. And, wide eyes, wide awake. What on earth was that? And my first thought was maybe a mouse or something, like some little animal pulled on my hair, which didn't make any sense. So I'm on my back and I look up, and above me there is this shiny, shimmery thing that the best way I can describe it is it looked like a Mylar balloon, but it wasn't a balloon, and there was no balloon in my room. 2 days into moving in, we hadn't had any celebrations or anything. And it was getting closer and closer to me. So I threw the covers over my head, and I am a Catholic, so my default apparently, I found out that night, is praying the Hail Mary. And so I said that prayer over and over and over and over and over until I finally fell back to sleep. And the next morning I went downstairs and I told my family what happened. And my mom said, well, you were obviously dreaming. And no, I wasn't dreaming. Well, it was your imagination. No, it wasn't my imagination. She's like, you're just being freaked out because you're in a new place. And I'm like, no, I was awake and this happened and something pulled my hair, and I can still feel where it pulled my hair. And again, just brushed off as being the melodramatic teenager who wasn't happy with the situation. And so I just kind of sucked it up and went about my day. And a few days later, the next event happened. So I was in the upstairs bathroom between my bedroom and my parents' bedroom. There was a wall heater that had just been put in before we moved there. So it's a little rectangular wall heater. It's underneath the window, and right next to it is the toilet, and across from the toilet is the bathtub, just to kind of set the picture. And, you know, you're doing what you're doing when you're in the bathroom. You're sitting on the toilet, or I was anyway. And my legs started getting hot. And I looked down and I could see the knob to the wall heater turning from 0 to 10. And I blinked and it was still turning. So I was like, this is insane. So obviously I finished what I was doing as quickly as I could and, you know, went running downstairs to tell mom. And this is August. We moved 2 weeks before school started. So that that was not a good time to have a heater on. There was no reason for the heater to have been on, and it wasn't on when I first went in there. So I'm telling mom what happened, and I'm telling her I saw the knob turn. And her answer to me was, that was your imagination again. And then I said, no, my leg was hot. The heater was on. Well, your brothers must have been up there playing around with it. And both of my brothers were like, no, we weren't. We were downstairs watching TV. We never played with the heater. We haven't touched the heater. Mom didn't believe them, and she didn't want to believe me. And it went on from there. Everything seemed to be focused on me. So a few weeks later, school had started. I was trying to relax. Everybody was downstairs watching TV. It was one evening, I think in the middle of the week, and I decided to take a hot bath and just try to relax. So I am in the tub, and from where I was in the tub, I could see the door to the bathroom and the light switch. And I saw a man's hand reach in and turn off the light switch. And I screamed. And I don't remember seeing a hand turn the light switch back on. Actually, the door was closed when the light switch came back on. But the lights came back on, and I got out, I dried off, I went downstairs, and I started yelling at my dad because I'd seen a man's hand turn the light off. And I was freaked out, and I was like, that was rude, and I can't believe you did that. You know how things have been here. And he just was looking at me incredulously, and my mom was like, we've all been down here the entire time. Nobody's been upstairs. Like, and that time she didn't tell me it was my imagination. I think it was probably starting to really dawn on her that there was something going on. But it was it was a scary, scary time for me. I hated being alone in the house. I was in high school. My brothers were in middle school. I would leave the house after them and get home before them. And my mom, like I said, is a nurse, and my dad was working at a TV station. So they would get home long after us. In the morning when my brothers would leave, I would leave. And in the evening or the afternoon, when I got off from school, I would not go into the house. I walked down to the park down the street unless the weather was bad. And I would sit there until I saw their bus go by, and then I'd go back up to the house so that I wasn't alone in the house. When the weather was bad, I would lock myself in my room and blast Metallica so that I couldn't hear anything in the house until somebody got home and banged on my door and told me to turn it down. So that's how I was dealing with things. I was avoiding it as much as I could. Then things started happening to my cat. We had an orange tabby named Dusty, who was about probably 6 years old at that time. And she's an indoor-outdoor cat. She did not like to go outside because she wasn't used to squirrels, and that neighborhood was full of squirrels. They kind of freaked her out a little bit. So she spent a lot more time inside. And the first time it happened, I remember my mom and I were upstairs having a conversation, and we heard her yowling, like this horrible, scared cat meow that we'd never heard her do before. And it sounded like it was coming from upstairs, but we hadn't seen her in a while. So we're looking around, and we follow the sound into their bathroom. And in their bathroom, there was the window over the toilet, and the window was closed, but on the other side of the window was my cat on the outside of the window, holding on to the screen for dear life. And there was no way she should have been up there. She wasn't much of a climber. There wasn't anything close to the window. And she was just screaming, like, please, somebody get me down, let me in. That just a horrible sound of a cat yowl who's just scared out of her mind. So we figured out how to open the window, and it took the two of us to kind of finagle the screen without dropping her and bring her in. That happened another 4 or 5 times during the year that we lived in that house. And as scared as she was the first time, nobody could tell me that she was doing that on purpose. And there was really no way she should have been doing that on purpose. It was stuff like that. And then after about 6 months, my dad started admitting to seeing shadows out of the corner of his eye. So he'd think there was a person and turn around and there'd be nothing there. And then it started happening to mom. And then my brother started having experiences. So at that point, my parents were like, okay, let's talk to the landlord. So they did. They went and they asked the landlord if anybody else who had lived in the house had ever told her about strange things happening in the house. And her answer to them was, you're crazy, and so are the people who lived there before you. So obviously, we were not the only ones to experience it. And a lot of people would say, maybe it was a poltergeist attached to the teenage daughter in the house. But the fact that, from what the landlord said, the previous tenants had experienced the same kind of stuff, and she didn't believe them either. I know it wasn't something that I brought into the house myself. So what do you do when the entire family is finally saying, okay, there's something going on, you're not crazy, and your mom is like, I'm sorry, I kept telling you it was your imagination. I was kind of at that turning point where I could spend the rest of my life in fear, or I could try to figure out what's going on. So the reason I call it a turning point is because that was the point where I realized the best way to overcome fear is to learn as much as you can about what you're afraid of. So that's where I started my fascination and my journey. And believe me, did not help me in that house at all. I could not wait to get out of there. And as soon as that 1-year lease was up, our house was finished. We had built a house in North Raleigh, and we moved, and that house was quiet and it was wonderful. So late teenage years, after all those experiences and going into early adulthood, I really wanted to get an understanding of not just what are ghosts and spirits and all of that, but why am I reacting to these things when nobody else seems to even be noticing them? Especially, I didn't even have like a sibling who was noticing this stuff until it got to the point where everybody in the family was having the experiences. So I started reading, and my first ghost stories author was Hans Holzer. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of him. He was one of the first paranormal investigators to write tons of books. He was around at the time of the Ed and Lorraine Warren too, and he worked with them sometimes. And he had this great book called Elvis Speaks from Beyond and Other Ghost Stories. And, being a little Elvis fan, I picked that one up first, and it was interesting. And then I picked up more and more, and I still have Hans Holzer books on the bookshelves behind me. I'm never parting with them. And then I started expanding my reading into other things like the different types of psychic, how to know if you're psychic, what is precognition, and all of this other stuff. So I read as much as I could. And then I started looking for other people who'd had similar experiences, and the different ways that I did that was finding and making friends with professional psychic mediums in the area. And there was one in particular who ran the metaphysical meet and greet at the Barnes and Noble at Crabtree Valley Mall. And I had seen an advertisement for it, I think in the News and Observer, back when the News and Observer used to be really thick, and that's where you found all this sort of stuff in the entertainment section. And so I went down, and it was basically a book club. It met once a month. Mary Beth was the psychic who was leading it, and she would basically assign everybody a book, and then we get together the next month and discuss the book, or at least the highlights of the book, and just have, like, you know, kind of a sharing circle in the middle of the Barnes and Noble, which I thought was the coolest thing ever because I'm already a bookaholic. And then some of us would go have dinner together afterwards. Like, we'd drive up Glenwood Avenue and go to Chili's and have dinner there. And so I got to be friends with her and some of the other budding psychics who had kind of latched onto her. And that helped me a lot because I was able to share my weirdness with other people who understood and start to get advice on how to kind of really get control of what was going on with me, like understanding the different sensations that I get, understanding that if I'm standing next to somebody and my knee starts hurting, but it doesn't make sense that my knee is hurting, that it's probably their knee that's hurting. And I've managed to freak some people out by saying, "Hey, is your knee hurting? Which one? The right one?" "Why, yes, it is." And then they go stand farther away from me, which I learned that's not a good party trick, or maybe it is, depending on the party. So then Mary Beth decided that at her house, she was going to do a Reiki weekend. So if you wanted to learn Reiki 1, you know, cough up some money for the master who was going to teach us, and go spend the weekend at her house. And it was a wonderful weekend. And that helped me learn a lot about energy flow and being able to control my energy and being able to use my own energy to relax people, to help heal them. Um, it was a really good learning experience, and I loved it. And by that point, I was engaged, and the now ex-husband was not interested in any of this. It kind of spooked him, and he didn't want to hear about it. But I was still hanging out with these people, and I was still seeking out other experiencers so we could have these conversations and help each other out. But the closer we got to the wedding, the less comfortable he was with me doing any of this. So the last thing that I learned from everybody was how to turn it off. And I did learn that I could visualize walls going up around me, and they would block out the energy from others that I was usually experiencing. And I've talked to other mediums, and they all have similar tricks, and the more you do it, the quicker it happens. So now I can do it in just an instant. But, you know, I used to visualize literally building up a little wall around me, like a circular wall. So I was in a column and blocked off. Some of the other ones that I've talked to, one in particular named Tiffany, she like visualizes herself in a body bag, and she zips up the body bag. And it's just whatever works for you, that's the way to do it. So for me, it's walls, and I can just say walls up, and that's it. I'm not experiencing it anymore. So yeah, I got married, and that didn't last very long. And then I decided that I was going to be a meteorologist. So I went back to school and got my meteorology degree. And that was 3 years of hardcore science and no time for distraction, because I was 30, going to school full time, trying to work as many hours as I could because I was living by myself, and just really did not have time for anything psychic at all. I didn't have time for those kinds of distractions. So my walls were up for over 3 years. And it was freeing to a degree. And I didn't realize I missed it until I was living in Minnesota, working as a meteorologist, and had an experience where I was in an old antique store, and someone unseen was following me around the store. And at first I thought there was, some other person shopping, but it was the middle of the week and it was a huge store. And there was one other woman in the store. And I would look around and I'd see where she was and I'd see where the one person working was, and they were nowhere near me. But I would just constantly feel like somebody was following right behind me. And at one point, I felt like there was a tall man standing behind my right shoulder, and I turned around to say something, and there was nobody there. So I, I'd seen enough and I'd kind of felt enough, and I was about to leave. And the other lady who was shopping had already left. So it's just me and the young lady who's working in the store. And out of nowhere, she says, "Do you know we have a ghost?" And I said, "No kidding. Do tell." And she said, "Well, he's only here after 5 after we close." And I'm thinking, I'm not going to tell you that he's not. Um, I didn't want to freak her out, so I just kind of let her tell her story. And apparently, he was very active and had managed to apport a key that she was looking for right in front of her face. So very strong one too. And I guess he had just recognized that I would acknowledge him, and I didn't give him much of that benefit because I didn't try to engage, but I was very aware of his presence. And then I immediately got that validation. So it was nice to know that the walls worked. And now that I was at a point where I could relax, it was nice to know that I still had it too. Especially since I had gotten to the point where I was no longer afraid of having it. So it was a good experience in that case. So I spent 2 years in Minnesota working as a broadcast meteorologist, and I learned some stuff about myself, including I am a Southern girl who does not belong where it snows 7 or 8 months out of the year. So I moved home. As soon as my 2-year contract was up, I came home. And I came back in September, late September of 2009. And in October of 2009, I saw in the News and Observer that that weekend was going to be the Haunted Mordeke Festival down at Mordeke Historic Park in Raleigh. And I was really interested in it because they were going to have costume contests that I could take my nephew to. And they were going to open the old Allen kitchen and do bobbing for apples and dipping apples in caramel over the old, stove, or not even stove. It's just an open fireplace. And kind of show how lives were back then. But in the chapel, NSPIR was going to be presenting their evidence from their first year of investigating at Mordeke Historic Park. And that's what really drew me. So I called my sister and I said, "Hey, can I take my nephew?" And at that point, I think he was 10 years old. And he was totally into Harry Potter and everything else. So I knew he would enjoy it. And I said, "Can I take my nephew? You don't have to do it because she doesn't like scary stuff. But just I'll take him and we'll go have a good time. And then you're off the hook for Halloween." And she said, "Okay, fine." So I took him and we did all the fun kids stuff. And then we went in, they were presenting every 20 or 30 minutes that night in the chapel. So we waited in line, we got to go in, I sat up front, and I was just absolutely fascinated with everything. So they were presenting evidence, including electronic voice phenomena recordings, which I will shorten to EVP because it takes too long to say electronic voice phenomena. And they had a video anomaly that they had caught in this stairwell in the main house, the one that you see in the picture here. And they'd only been there to investigate 2 nights so far, and they already had all of these stories of things that happened while they were there. And I like the way that they tried to explain things in a mundane way before jumping to this is paranormal. And it turns out that George, the founder of the group, is a biologist. And, he was very science-based, but there were other people in the group who were more on the artsy side and on the sensitive side. So after their presentation, I walked up to him and I said, how would you need somebody like me, somebody who is a scientist, but is also a sensitive, and I would love to do this, how could I do this? And he said, well, we have a meetup group. It's called Carolina Hauntings, Apparitions, and Poltergeist Society, CHAPS for short. And we meet once a month. And then sometimes we'll take the meetup group members on investigations of public places. And that's how we kind of test you out. So I said, okay. So their next meeting was 2 weeks later. They meet for dinner. They'd have a guest speaker. And it was just a fun, kind of reminded me of the metaphysical meet and greet, from my 20s. So I really enjoyed the meeting, and I guess I made a good impression on George because he said, hey, we're going to the Ferry Plantation up in Virginia Beach in a couple of weeks. Would you like to go with us? And I said, absolutely, 100%. And he said, okay, you can ride with me. I go up ahead of time and set everything up before the rest of the group gets there. So that is what I did. My first official investigation with NSPIR was actually as a CHAPS member going to the Ferry Plantation. Now, if you have not been to the Ferry Plantation in Virginia Beach, Virginia, this place is amazing, especially if you're into spooks and spirits and electronic voice phenomena. The nickname of this house is the House of 1,000 Voices, because every group that goes there comes back with EVP recordings. And just to explain what EVP is, this is a situation where you have a little voice recorder, kind of like this one. You get it nowadays, you get it off Amazon. I got my first one at Target. And you go into each room of the house and you sit and you turn your recorders on. Usually in a serious group, everybody has a recorder. And you might have video recorders running and other stuff, other toys to play with, but just about everybody brings a voice recorder with them. And you just sit. Most of the time you're sitting in the darkness because it's at night, and you're asking questions and giving whatever spirit might be present a chance to answer those questions. And you don't necessarily hear anything other than your own questions until you go home and you listen to those recordings. And then if you hear a voice of somebody that was not physically sitting with you, you have an EVP. And you go to the Ferry Plantation, you're going to come back at some point with an EVP. It's an amazing place. So George was testing me out on that first trip. We got there about an hour before everybody else, and he decided to bring the video equipment. So he was going to set it up, and he said, this place is great. He introduced me to Belinda, who was the docent, and she was going to be our sitter for the night. So she'd stay with us overnight and just make sure everything went smoothly and nobody messed anything up in the house. And she was really, really sweet. And she has since passed away, and I hope she didn't join the ghosts there. I hope she's resting in peace. But she was just so nice. She said, ask me any questions, but George told me to just let you walk around and take a look at everything. So I did. I walked around. There were a few rooms downstairs that were interesting, but I went up the main stairway and into the room on the right and just stopped dead cold in my tracks in that room. And Belinda was walking past the doorway, and she saw me just standing in the middle of the room, kind of shaking my head, because I had gotten that sensation, and I haven't explained it yet, but the initial sensation when I'm in the presence of a spirit of some sort is this pressure on the center of my back, and it just feels like somebody's pushing on it. It's not painful or anything, but it's just right in the center of my back. And it kind of initially, when I was a kid and I would get that, it would just give me the willies and make me want to run away. And I would run away. But now when I get it, I'm like, okay, there's something going on here. And this was a very strong pressure. So I knew whatever the presence was, they really wanted my attention. So Belinda was like, what you thinking? And I said, there is somebody in this room who wants my attention. She was like, okay. And she went on about her business because George had told her to leave me alone. So I walked around the rest of the house. I went downstairs. George was still in the process of setting up the video equipment because we had a ton of setup to do with that. And I didn't know how to help him yet. And he before he turned around, he looked at me and he said, so what do you think? And before I could say anything, Belinda was beside me going, she felt Sally. And I was like, yes. Okay. Was that Sally that I felt? And she said, yes, she's been active up there all day. And that pretty much cemented my position with NSPIR. And within about a year and a half or 2 years, I was made the vice president of the group. We are a 501c3. And I'm still the vice president. We're not as active as we used to be because when I joined and for several years after I joined, we had about 15 members and we were doing 1 to 2 investigations every single weekend. And after a while, most of our members got burnt out because you're not just doing investigations. You're not just staying up all night asking questions into your recorder. Eventually you have to listen back to those hours of audio and you have to watch hours of video and you have to write reports and check in, especially if you're doing private residence as opposed to a publicly available place like the Ferry Plantation. There's a lot of work that goes into investigating. So after a while, we kind of started backing off. We didn't do as many public locations. We got a little pickier about the private investigations. And so it became a little more bearable. And as that happened, then we had, people move, they have babies, they do all that stuff. So we're not as big as we used to be, but we'll still take the occasional case and we still have fun with it. So the next place we went was Mordeke Historic Park. We did have the contract with the city of Raleigh. That started at, it was originally a 2-year contract. And when I met them, they had just finished up their first year. And the way the contract works is the investigative group gets to go in and spend the night at least 2 times over the course of the year. And then they don't talk about their findings until they present them at the Haunted Mordeke Festival, which is usually the weekend of Halloween, or if Halloween's the middle of the week, it's the Saturday before Halloween. And once you've presented there, then you can talk about what you caught that year, but you keep it quiet until you get there and you make the public presentations there. It was supposed to be a 2-year contract. We ended up having that contract for 8 years. Obviously, the city thought we were doing a good job. And we eventually said, we think we've done as much as we can do here. I think the ghosts are kind of bored with us. It may be time for somebody else to take the contract. So we stepped down, and some friends of ours had just started a group called the Ghost Guild. And they said, hey, can you write us a letter of reference? And many of them used to be CHAPS members, and they learned how to investigate by going out with NSPIR. So we were like, yeah, we trust you. We trained you, of course we'll write you a reference. So now they have the contract and they've had it since we stepped down in 2016. And I'm very happy to say they're doing a great job, and they occasionally will tap me to come tell stories for the Haunted Mordeke event. So it's a really, I still love Mordeke. I feel like it's home every time I go there. I spent so many nights there. It's easily has that feeling for me. When I drive past it on my way downtown, I'm like, hi, hi ghosties. I can't help it. I'm weird. So it is as active as people say. We caught so many EVP there, and I'm going to play one for you a little bit later, actually 2. But I do want to tell a story of this one night that we were investigating. It was George, another investigator named Penny, and myself sitting in the overseer's office, which is a little 2-room building kind of across the yard from the main house. And I was facing the front window of the office. Penny was sitting with her back to the window facing me, and George was sitting in the doorway to the next room. And the three of us were doing our EVP session. And as I'm talking to Penny and, trying to verbalize whatever my next question is, I see a shadow go behind her, like on the other side of the window behind her. And it's a tall man in a stovepipe hat, kind of like what you would visualize Abe Lincoln wearing. And he walks behind her, going from my left to right. And I stopped cold and I said, "Did you see that?" And she said, "Yes," because her eyes were huge, but she's facing me. And I said, "What did you see?" And she said, "There was a man in a tall hat that went behind you." And she pointed from my right to my left. And I was like, how would that work? She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Because he went from left to right. He went this way to that way behind you. How did you see him behind me, going the opposite direction?" And George was like, "I didn't see anything," because he wasn't looking at either the window or the wall. He was facing the wall beside us. And I said, "It looked like he was on the porch." And George said, "There's no porch out there." And I said, "There had to be a porch. Like, he was too tall to not be on the porch." And George is like, "Nikki, go outside. How many times have we been in this office?" So I walk out to prove him wrong, and there's no porch there. All there is the stoop with a couple of steps going up into the doorway. So the guy would have had to be about 9 feet tall. And I was like, yeah, so that was probably paranormal. And George was like, how did I miss it? And Penny was excited because I think that was her first night investigating with us there. And she was like, "Oh, this is great." And I'm like, "Oh, you just wait." Like, this is just the beginning. But that's my favorite because even we both had an experience at the same time, but it didn't match. Like, it matched to a degree, but it didn't make any sense. And it's just, I can still see it in my mind's eye when I think about it, and it really just didn't make any sense at all. So we did look, obviously I went outside when I went to look to prove George wrong and got proven wrong myself. I looked around, there was nobody outside. The other group, there were only 7 of us there that night. The other group was in the main house. And we called over on our radio, our walkie-talkie, and said, "Hey, have you seen anybody in the yard out there?" And they said, no, they were upstairs and they were in a room where they could have seen somebody. They said, there's not been anybody out there. So when we all met back up later, we explained what happened. And, they said, definitely there was nobody walking around outside. So that place is, we don't always jump to this conclusion, but that place is haunted. It's great. I love it. So then the other public location I did want to give a little story about is the Battleship, North Carolina, which is in Wilmington. And they do allow groups to rent it out for the night. The last time we did it, it was $75 per person, and you could only have up to 12 people. But you get the ship to yourself. Like, it's not some of those public locations where they rent it out to 10 groups in the same night. And you have to worry about stepping on each other's feet and hearing each other in the audio later. So it's really absolutely worth the money if you ever have the chance to do it. And we did it many, many times. And we always booked it for the night of the fireworks. So in the spring, it was the Azalea Festival. I don't remember which event it was it was usually November that we would do it again, and there'd be fireworks shot off over the ship. And our theory was that it would, fireworks kind of sound like gunfire. So it could stir things up a bit because you're kind of generating a similar environment audio wise. So we would wait for the fireworks to end. We'd be allowed on the ship. We talked to Danny, who's the famous night watchman who lived on the ship and has written a book about all the crazy, spooky experiences he had. And he would actually not go on the ship while we were on the ship. He'd stay down in the gift shop on shore. So we really did have the ship to ourselves. We would like we always went in pairs. We used the same room over and over as our home base, and we'd split up into two groups, and one we'd make sure that we were in opposite sides of the ship so we couldn't hear each other. And we did everything in pairs for safety reasons. So there was one point in one night we were down there where my friend Dimitri and I needed to use the restroom because, you know, that happens. So, and it's funny how many stories I have about restrooms. Sorry. Um, is we go to the restroom, and it's just a 2-stall bathroom on the main floor of the ship, right 2 rooms away from what we were calling home base. So we left our group in home base. We went to the bathroom. We're each in a stall, and we hear footsteps in the room, like in the bathroom with us outside of the stalls. And I said, Dee, are you hearing that? And she said, yeah. And I said, is there somebody else in here with us? And we both looked like under the doors. There's nobody there. And we both came out at the same time. Nobody there. And we both had the willies, which is awesome. And we went back to our group and we said, you know, we weren't planning on investigating this one particular spot, but we need to investigate the women's restroom. And everybody gave us a funny look, and they're like, first off, there's 6 of us and we can't fit inside there. I said, okay, so we won't actually investigate the women's restroom. We'll investigate the hallway right next to it. So we went out and we did an EVP session for about 15 minutes, sitting right next to the women's restroom, asked our questions, you know, who was in the bathroom with Dee and Nikki? And we didn't feel like we were getting any interaction. We didn't hear any more footsteps. So we went back to home base to meet up with the other group and have snacks and do that sort of thing. Cause by about 1 o'clock in the morning, you're getting hungry and you need caffeine. So I always turn my recorder off as soon as we say the session is ended, because 15 minutes is a good chunk of time to have, you know, headphones on and be listening intently. And then you need breaks. So you turn the recorder off to get that break. And then the next file will be the next room you were in. Well, Dee was the opposite of me. She just left her recorder running all night. So we get home, and a few days after we get home, I get an email from her saying, listen to this clip and tell me what you hear, which is the way we do audio review. We don't taint each other's experience by saying what we think we hear. We say, listen to this clip. It's about 10 seconds in. Tell me what you think you hear. And so she sent it to me, and I clearly heard a male voice say, I love you. And so I sent back, okay, who loves you? And she said, this was on the ship right after we finished the EVP session in front of the women's restroom. And there was one guy in our group. There were 5 women and 1 guy. And he was somebody that I had gone on a few dates with. And she immediately thought it was him whispering to me. And I said, heck no, that was not him whispering to me, because we're not like that. And she said, okay, well, just ask him and just make sure, because maybe you didn't hear it, but maybe he was professing his love to you. So half embarrassed, I emailed him and I said, listen to this clip, tell me what you hear. And he said, well, that's romantic. And I said, was that you? And he said, no. I'm like, okay, that's all I needed to know. So we got an EVP of a male who was not the male that was with us, whispering, I love you, very close to the microphone, it sounded like. And we shared that with the rest of NSPIR, and George was really excited about it. I mean, we all were, but he was like super excited about it. So much so that he was talking to the leader of a group that's based out of Wilmington a few months later. And they were comparing notes about Battleship investigations. And she said, do you know what? We got the coolest EVP. We were near the women's restroom, and one of my girls picked up, I love you, from a male voice, and it wasn't any of our people. And he said, are you kidding me? And she's like, no. And he said, one of my girls did the same thing. So we have two investigative groups who had the exact same experience. I don't know if they were followed around in the bathroom, but pretty much the same experience, and got the same EVP in the same area of the ship. So there is definitely an amorous sailor who likes to hang out near the women's restroom. So ladies, take that however you want to when you're going to visit the battleship. I love that place. So I did mention one of our rules. I did want to go over our rules for investigations, because ethics and safety are very important when you are investigating the paranormal. And the first one is really easy, and it actually has to do with the law. No trespassing. If you don't have permission to investigate a place, don't go. If you want to investigate a place, ask the owner for permission. There are a lot of people who call themselves investigative groups who say that they are going to investigate an old house, an abandoned house. Even if the house looks abandoned, somebody owns it. And there are so many things wrong with trespassing, but don't do it. And that's the way that paranormal investigation gets a bad rap, because you hear about people who get injured trespassing and they say they were out ghost hunting. There was a case in Western North Carolina just a couple of years ago where a group was on a railroad trestle in the middle of the night waiting to see a ghost train, and a real train came by, and two people were on the trestle and jumped, and one ended up dying. And it's a tragedy that could have been avoided by just not trespassing. Like, it's that simple. And then there was a whole uproar about, why are these people out where they shouldn't be, and it makes the rest of us look bad whether somebody ends up passing away or not. Second rule, again, hey, let's not make the real paranormal investigators look bad. No provoking. So there are people on TV shows who have made a name for themselves by going into supposedly haunted locations and screaming obscenities at the ghost. And well, first off, that's rude. If you think about the fact that one of the theories of what a ghost is, the most popular theory, is that it used to be a living person. Why would you go into a living person's house or a non-living person's house and scream obscenities at them, or yell, "Come at me," or, "Hey, if you want to hit me, it's okay to hit me. Oh my God, why did you hit me?" It's not cool on so many levels. You want to treat any form of consciousness, whether it's attached to a living body or not, with respect. And so we do not provoke. The other reason we don't provoke is, especially if you're talking about a place of business where people work, and they're in there every day, or a house where people are they call you in because they're not comfortable in their own home already. They want to know what's going on. They want to know if you can explain it. They want to know if they actually have a ghost. Maybe their kids aren't sleeping. Maybe they're not sleeping. Maybe their dogs are freaking out. Why would you go in and make whatever might be there angry, and then you have the luxury of leaving while they have to live with whatever it is you just ticked off? Like, again, rude, inconsiderate. Just don't do it. You just make matters worse, especially in the case where people are already afraid to be in their own home. So the rule number 3 is don't jump to conclusions. And there are 2 parts to this rule. First, just say, okay, I do have that. Look for mundane explanations first. There have been so many times where we got called into a home and we didn't go do a pre-investigation interview. And after several times, we finally always did a pre-investigation interview. So we just went to a house that told us they had they had free time on a weekend night, and could we come spend some time there and see what's causing the things that go bump in the night? And it ends up being plumbing or HVAC systems or the pet hamster, which is a nighttime animal. And there's nothing paranormal going on. I never feel anything the entire time we're there. And, while the people are pleasant and maybe they offer us a Coke or something, it's kind of a waste of time. So after several of those, we did start doing pre-investigation interviews so we kind of decide, okay, is there really something going on here that's worth bringing the entire team for an overnight investigation? Always look for the mundane explanations first, and don't jump to the conclusion that it's paranormal and you're going to prove it's paranormal. Number two of don't jump to conclusions is it's probably not a demon. If there is paranormal activity going on, I've only had one or two out of hundreds of investigations where it might have possibly been something along those lines. But going back to the TV shows that like to say everything's a demon, that's not cool. If you go into a place and you claim there's a demon, you better have some pretty good proof, because you are scaring the living daylights out of the people that you're talking to. It's not a joke. It's not some way to drum up business. It's a horrible way to sell advertising if you're on TV. And it's very likely not a demon. It's, in my experience, most of those angry type ghosts were angry type people in life. And if you are a jerk in life, you're going to be a jerk in death if you get stuck. Or it could be a situation where there is a spirit that hasn't crossed over and they're trying to get some attention because they don't know why they haven't crossed over. And so it could be a number of things, but most likely it's not going to be a demon. Number 4, be honest about your motives. If you are there to help, like I try to be there to help, say it. If you're there just out of curiosity, say it. If you're there because, hey, I want to see a ghost and this might be a good place for it, and I've never seen a ghost, but oh, it'd be so cool, say it. If you're there to get a thrill, say it. If you're there to try to debunk everything, we did have a couple of those people in our group too. We need them to balance the rest of us out, just be honest about your motives, because you have to be able to trust each other, especially when you're spending all night in the darkness with each other. And if you are interested in investigating a place and you've never done it before, but say you have a friend who is like, I think there's something going on in my house, and you ask them, hey, can I come over and bring a recorder and do some EVP sessions? Be honest with them about why you want to do it. Do you want to do it because you're curious? Do you want to do it because you want to be scared? Just be honest about it. And always keep it confidential unless you're told that it's okay to talk about it. So especially with NSPIR, we actually had all of our members sign confidentiality agreements when they joined. We did a lot of private residence investigations and private business investigations. And I did write a book about my experiences, but I did not share any exact locations. I changed the names or did not give names and just said the woman of the house. Because, well, it kind of goes back to, first off, you don't want to be rude or inconsiderate. Secondly, you don't want people hearing about a place. Imagine people driving through your neighborhood at Halloween time and you don't have any decorations out, but they're slowing traffic down because they want to get a look at your house because they heard it was haunted, or worse, they trespass on your property because they want to get a look inside. That's not cool. Paranormal peeping toms are just as bad as regular peeping toms. Like, it's just not cool. So keep it confidential, especially if asked to keep it confidential. But if you don't know whether or not somebody would want you talking about their place, their location, just don't talk about it. And then, like I said earlier, we always use the buddy system. So we definitely make it a habit to go everywhere in pairs. One is for safety and the other is for corroboration. So say we're on the Battleship, which has a lot of places that, if you're walking around in the dark and you don't have a good flashlight, you can hurt yourself. You can fall down a hole where there's not a grate if you're way down in the bowels of the ship. You could do some serious damage to yourself, and so it always helps to have another person with you to get help if something happens. The other thing is corroboration. If I had gone to the bathroom in the Battleship by myself and came out and said, "Hey, there was somebody walking around the bathroom," and I didn't have a witness or anybody to back up the story, they might have thought that I was just trying to get attention, because, we would take the CHAPS members with us, and the CHAPS members didn't know me like the NSPIR members. They're the meetup group members. And they might have only been to one or two of our meetings, and, they don't know me. Why would they trust me if I just by myself said, "Hey, there's a ghost in the bathroom." It was cool, a little creepy because it's not where you want to see a ghost, but there was something going on. So use the buddy system for those two reasons. And now I'll tell some stories about private investigations. And like I said, see rule number 5, which is keep it confidential. I am not sharing exact locations or names in these stories, but I am going to share some of my favorites. So the first one, it's called "It Started with a Ouija Board," because that's what happened. So in a couple of different ways, actually. We got called to a house south of Raleigh, and it was during the time period where there was on the Animal Planet, there was a show about paranormal pets. So we got a lot of calls during that year when that show first came out. People saying their pets were acting kind of strange, and they thought maybe they had a ghost because their dogs were staring at like a corner all the time. I have a black cat. She likes to stare at one particular closet door. I don't have ghosts in my house. My cat's weird. She has a fascination with a closet that she's not allowed into. But back then that was like a really popular reason to try to get a paranormal group to come out. But in this case, we got a call. This couple was at their wits' end because they were having their own experiences in the house, but every night at 3 a.m., their big dog, they had several dogs and cats, but their big dog would wake them up staring at the wall above the head of their bed, barking and growling. 3 a.m. every single night. So they were not getting sleep. They couldn't figure out what the dog was growling at. And they were like, "Can you please come check this out?" So George and I went down to do a pre-investigation interview. And when we do that, I do a cold walkthrough. So that means I don't want to be told anything about the experiences they're having. I don't want to be told anything about the history of the house. I'm going in completely cold. And as soon as we get there, we set our stuff down and we tell the homeowners, this is the way we do it. Nikki's a sensitive, and she's going to walk around the house and see what she gets before we even talk to you. And some homeowners will follow us around the house, which is fine. They don't know us. They don't want us poking through their stuff. And some will just sit down on the couch and say, "Okay, have at it. Come back when you're ready." In this case, the couple, the husband and wife, were both there. The husband stayed on the couch. The wife was curious, so she followed us around. And I went into each room and I just give like initial sensations to George if I picked up anything. And in the bedroom, I did pick something up, but it wasn't very strong. I was like, this room feels different than the rest of the house. Then we walked to the dining room, which is at the front house near the main entrance. And it had a big old china cabinet in it. And I walked around the dining room table and I stopped at the corner of the china cabinet near the window. And I did not like the feeling there. It was gross. I said, "George, there's something in this corner. It's It's not good. It's just this icky, gross feeling. I can't really explain it right now, but it's gross. Like that's the only word I can think of. And so he made a note, and she was following about 5 feet behind him. So I wasn't even sure if she heard me say it because I don't talk very loud. So we went through the rest of the house, and then we sat down with them, and George said, okay, tell us what's going on and how it got started. And she said that her parents had passed and she was missing them, and she didn't feel like she had closure with either of their deaths. So she bought a Ouija board, and she used it one night when her husband was out of town, and she thought she had gotten in touch with her dad. And after a few conversations through the Ouija board, she went from feeling like she'd gotten in touch with her dad to feeling like somebody was pretending to be her dad. And then things started happening in the house. So she put the Ouija board away, and the stuff continued to happen in the house. And that's when the dogs started barking at 3 a.m. and the other dogs were acting freaked out at different times. And they heard stuff moving when the dogs were all accounted for, it was not the normal thing, even though they had a house full of pets. And George asked her, where is the Ouija board now? And she looked at me and she said, in the china cabinet in the dining room where she didn't like the energy. And I was like, okay, validation. And I hate Ouija boards, just so you know. So we decided to bring the whole group back to the house for a full investigation. And that day, George said, hey, can we take the Ouija board out of your house? And she said, please just take it. So George put it in the trunk of the car, and I did not like the ride home that day, because we usually ride together on everything so we could discuss the experiences. Anyway, he put it in the trunk of the car, and he likes to tell people he rode around with it for 6 months, and he just wanted to see how I reacted to getting into the car with the Ouija board. And I had blocked it out at that point. The walls were up behind me. I didn't feel it. Oh yeah. So one more part of the story, we go back with the whole group, and one of our investigators is a professed skeptic. Like, he's there to debunk. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff, or he just wants it to be proven to him. But one way or another, he's going to try to debunk it. So we're setting up our equipment, and we do a baseline reading with a K2 meter, which measures electromagnetic fields, just to see if there are any spots in the house that have like unusually high readings, so that we can make a mental note, because people who are sensitive to that, including myself, can get weirded out by the energy of high EMF. And some people, it causes them to have nightmares, hallucinations, and that sort of thing. So we always make a note of that. And he was setting something up in the master bathroom, and his head was above the vanity close to the wall. And I was in there too, just with the K2 meter. And he goes, huh? And I said, what? And he said, I just heard a growl. And I said, I didn't hear a growl, because I'm thinking the dog or something. And he's like, no, the wall growled. And I was like, what? What do you mean? He goes, there was a growl right here next to my head. And the dogs were all outside and accounted for. So I was like, okay, noted. The skeptic heard a growl from the wall. And we told George about it, and he was like, it's probably nothing. This is imagination. And I'm like, okay, whatever you say, George. So later that night, when we're doing an EVP session in the master suite, Derek and I are sitting in the master bath, and the others are out in the bedroom, but we were all where we could see each other. And Derek suddenly goes, ow, ow, ow. And I'm like, what? And he goes, I just got a sharp pain in my eye. And I'm like, are you getting a migraine? Like, are you okay? And he goes, it was just quick. It was sharp. It hurt. I'm like, okay, you're on record where everybody's got a recorder. A few seconds later, I ask, we all settle back down. I ask, why 3 o'clock in the morning? Like, why that time? Why is the dog barking every morning at 3 a.m. and keeping them up? And I ended up getting an EVP from that question. I got an answer, but I couldn't make it out. It was so low. And I listened to it a few years later, and I did hear an answer, and it creeped me out more than anything. And at this point, we were done with that investigation. We'd actually gone out there a few times. We took a psychic out there to clear the house. So this was years later when I was writing my book and I was going back through my old files. What I heard that time was because it pleases me, which is easily the creepiest answer you could get from something that started with a Ouija board. So my next story, let me check my time here. I may have to finish this on the other side of the break. I hope nobody minds. But my next story is about a woman who she left an abusive relationship, and she got a divorce from her husband. So now he's an ex-husband, and she moved out to the country to get away from him. She didn't let anybody tell him where she had moved to, and she had her young adult daughter, the daughter's boyfriend, and their infant living with her in this small house out on a farm. They were renting the house from the farm owner. And the ex-husband swore that he would find her one way or another, and ended up killing himself in a public place in a different city about 30 minutes away. And after his death, things started happening in the house. So they would turn off all the lights, lock up, and leave for the day and come back, and everything is unlocked and all the lights are on. Or she would go upstairs and be the only one in the house and come downstairs and all the lights would be off, but all the doors in the kitchen cupboards were open. You know, there was constantly some sort of physical activity going on there. And the reason that they called us in was because it escalated. They would hear the infant cry at night, and when they picked him up, there'd be scratch marks in the middle of his back. So whatever was there was very strong and seemed to be very angry. And she was also having nightmares that demons were walking up the steps to her bedroom. She lived in the loft of the house. It was kind of like an attic that had been turned into a bedroom. So she was upstairs, everybody else was downstairs. And that was a recurring nightmare for her. And it had all started after her ex-husband committed suicide. So they called us in and we went for the pre-investigation interview. And we went up into her room. George had the K2 meter, and he was looking for a high EMF to maybe explain why she was having nightmares like that. And the minute I walked into the room, my head started hurting. And the longer we were in there, the worse it got. And I said, George, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this because I'm getting a migraine. And he's like, okay, we'll go down and just talk to her for a few minutes and then we'll get out of here. And I was like, I am really not doing well. At the right side of my head, it was like a splitting headache. And I wasn't sure really if I was going to be able to hold it together. So he's like, okay, let's go downstairs. As soon as I crossed that threshold to go downstairs, my head stopped hurting. So that was the first time I'd ever experienced something that dark and that intense in a very specific part of a house. So we that was a cold walkthrough too. I also had no idea that he was checking for EMF because she was having nightmares in that room, and I didn't know any of the stories yet. So we got downstairs and my head wasn't hurting, and I'm like, I'm fine. And he was like, well, that's interesting. So then she told us everything that had been happening, and we decided to go back. So we go back, and it was actually a pretty quiet night until we got up into that bedroom, and it was her and her daughter. The daughter's boyfriend had taken the child somewhere else for the night. So it was her daughter, and 4 investigators, including me, George, and the skeptic I told you about. And we were asking questions and using the K2 meter back then to try to do the blink once for yes, blink twice for no, and see if we could get some some yes and no answers and communication that way. And of course, we're using the recorders and cameras. And we started getting answers up in that room. And the mother and the daughter were asking most of the questions, and the questions kept getting darker and the answers kept getting darker. And I noticed that our skeptic was watching his wristwatch very intently. And I'm thinking, he cannot be bored. Like, this is crazy. This is this is weird. We're getting activity. I don't like it in this room. He can't be bored. And after a while, he was like, okay, everybody shut up. And we're like, well, that was rude. He said, no, just be quiet for a second. And he kept watching his wristwatch, and he kind of did at the time that the K2 meter lit up without a question being asked. And he said, just hold still another minute. So we all just watched him. And when the K2 meter lit up again, he nodded, and it was happening every 30 seconds, whether we were asking a question or not. So he and one of the other investigators got up and took the K2 meter and walked around the house, inside and outside. And what they found was there was an electrical box outside the house that was doing some sort of a cycle that was causing the K2 meter to light up every 30 seconds. And that is why we stopped using K2 meters on investigations for anything other than finding high EMF fields. Anything can set those off. We knew that radio communication could set them off. We put our phones into airplane mode when we do investigations because we know our phones can set those off. But at that point, we were in a situation where something that we couldn't control was setting it off, and it was causing false positives basically, and making the night way creepier than it needed to be. So we didn't get any EVP in that investigation, and we did have more communication with the client, and they ended up moving. And I hope that that was enough to lose the ex-husband. And then my last personal story is called learning not to hold my tongue on a horse farm. So one thing that I struggle with is trusting myself, because I am a scientist and a sensitive and a writer, and I do write novels. So I have a very good imagination. And despite the fact that my parents made me scared to death of my own imagination as a child, it also made me very aware of what my imagination could potentially do. So we got asked to go out to a horse farm in Western Wake County by a friend of George's, and she had some activity, and she just basically just wanted to talk about it. But George went ahead and treated it like an investigation and had me do a cold walkthrough. And it's a two-story house. It's an old horse farm, but there weren't horses there anymore. There was an empty barn that the front of the house looked over, and it was a really quiet, peaceful place. All I knew was this was a friend of George's. I didn't know any other reason we were out there other than she asked us to come out. So I did the cold walkthrough, and in her bedroom, I felt tingling on both of my arms, and it was a little painful. It was just kind of strange. So I said that. And then we went upstairs into what I thought was a guest bedroom. And in my mind's eye, I could see a woman standing at these two glass doors that used to go out to what was probably a veranda, but it wasn't much of anything at that point. And I could just see her looking toward the barn. And I told myself in my head, okay, that's a really great scene for a story, but I didn't say anything out loud. We finished the walkthrough, we went downstairs, and we were talking to the lady, and she was explaining to us that she had a roommate, and that was the room upstairs was the roommate's bedroom, and her favorite thing to do was stand at that window and watch the horses down around the barn. So I had seen that, but I second guessed myself. And because I didn't speak up when I saw it, I didn't say anything when she told us that, because I didn't want to be the one going, oh, wait, I knew that, and just, it didn't feel like a credible thing to do at the time. But I did tell George as we were leaving that I had had that experience. Well, the roommate had died of a heroin overdose, and the lady didn't even know that the roommate was hooked on heroin. She just knew she slept a lot. They didn't, the way that their hours were, they didn't see a lot of each other. One would be asleep while the other was up, and that sort of thing. And she just thought she had a quiet roommate. But at one point she realized she hadn't seen her roommate in over a day, and she went up there and she had passed away. And the autopsy showed heroin overdose, and she had no idea. Like, she was living with somebody who had a problem. And so it was a sad story. And as we were leaving, I told George about, I held my tongue, and I shouldn't have held my tongue. But the more ironic thing was, by the time we got home, I felt like I had a canker sore under my tongue, and it hurt to swallow. It hurt to talk. I'd never had one underneath my tongue before. It was in the back underneath. And I looked in the mirror and I'm like, I've got this huge canker sore. And I Googled what could cause that. And one of the answers that I got right away was, some people hide their heroin addiction by shooting under their tongue. So it can be very painful to be an empath. And ironically, I held my tongue that day, and then I hurt my tongue that day. So that was a lesson in and of itself. I think, okay, I'm going to pause right now. And I'm 2 minutes early. I hope that's okay, Smith, but we'll come back to the EVP after our break.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That is awesome. That's a perfect place to take a little break. And so what we're going to do now, wow, those stories have been incredible, and I can't wait to hear more. And so we're going to take about 10 minutes. I'm going to put a slide up that says we'll be right back. And everyone can take a break, get something to drink, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope everybody had a nice little break. All right, Nikki's going to continue now. I think you had, hold on a second. I think you had a little bit left of your presentation, and then we'll get into some question and answer. What I'll do when you're ready for that is I'll read what's in the chat box, and I can read it to you, and then you can respond, and we'll just take it from there, see how it goes. We'll go to 9:30.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going back to sharing my screen. All right, you can see that, correct? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we stopped where you get to hear a little bit of the electronic voice phenomena that I have captured over the years. And I'll give you a little context for each of these clips. The very first one is, well, I titled it My Favorite from the Mordecai House, because it is my absolute favorite from the Mordecai House. So this was a night where my subgroup was myself, a lady named Tommy, and another lady named Mallory. And the three of us were the only people in the house. The person who is the sitter for the night was with the other group out in the outbuildings on the property. And the door was locked just for safety reasons. When you're upstairs alone in the house at 2 a.m. and it's a public location, you want to make sure the door is locked. So we knew there was nobody else in the house with us. And we were upstairs in the room. If you have ever been to the house, you go up the stairs and there's one bedroom, directly in front of the stairwell. And then if you turn around, there's the sleeping porch and then a bedroom on the left and a bedroom on the right. So we were in the bedroom to the right of the sleeping porch, which is a room that I've always called my favorite, because even before I started investigating, like when I was in my 20s, I took a tour of the house on a Saturday afternoon with one of my psychic friends. And we were very aware of somebody in watching the tour in that room. And both of us pointed to the same corner very discreetly, like there's somebody over there. So it's always been my favorite room in the house. So it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, late night. We're getting tired at this point. We've been in all of the outbuildings, and this is our last room for the night. And we're at the point where we're sitting on the floor, because you don't want to sit on the furniture at Mordeke. It's basically a museum. So you do your best not to sit on the furniture. So we're sitting on the floor. Tommy and Mallory were actually laying on the floor. We were that tired. And I was closest to the doorway. And we started hearing footsteps while we're doing the EVP session out in the hallway. And it was like soft padded footsteps, and kind of went along with the rustle of fabric. So we're all looking at each other, and we don't whisper. So full voice, we're like, do you hear that? Yes, I hear that. There's somebody out there. And we're looking, and of course there's nobody out there, and the door's locked. So there couldn't be anybody out there. And so Tommy says, we hear you outside the door. Please come in. And you can imagine my surprise when I was listening to my voice recorder a few days later, sitting, watching video that's silent video and listening to the voice recorder, because I try to multitask and get as much stuff out of the way as possible when we're doing review. And I almost threw my headphones when I heard this. So I'm not going to tell you what I heard. I am going to play it. If you don't have good speakers, you may want to turn them up right now. And I'm gonna play it 3 times. So hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
Hear you outside the door. Please come in. So, all prickly around my hand.
Okay, I'm gonna play it again.
Hear you outside the door. Please come in. So, all prickly around my hand.
And one more time.
Hear you outside the door. Please come in. So, all prickly around my hand.
So hopefully you could hear that there was an answer to Tommy saying, we hear you outside the door, please come in. I can't tell you what it said. And it's not because I'm not trying to taint your idea. It's because we really have no idea what it said. It's clearly a male voice, and there was not a male in the building, which is why it's my favorite. Like, you cannot blame this on anybody else living in the building. So we got the man of the house answering probably why he was not comfortable coming into a bedroom with 3 women. Because if you think about who the man of the house was, most likely he lived in a time where 3 women did not invite a man into a bedroom, especially if they weren't related to him. So you can only imagine what he was actually saying there. But it is definitely one of my absolute favorites. So this next one happened in the Allen kitchen, which is the kitchen that's separate from the house. It's an old slave kitchen. And it's one of the popular locations. They have an herb garden built on the backside of it, or planted on the backside of it. And it's It's an interesting one because one of the stories, and it's something that actually happens to us every single time we were there. They always have herbs hanging from the ceiling. They're bunches of herbs. They're not always in the same place, but there's usually anywhere from 4 to 8 hanging from the beams on the ceiling in this building. And it's because it's an old kitchen, and they try to make it as historically accurate as possible for people who come and tour the park. So the weird part about this is every time we investigate, one bundle of herbs, and like I said, they're not always hanging in the same spot, and it's not always the same bundle in the same spot, will start rotating while we're doing our EVP session. And I've gotten it on video. It wasn't very good video. And I used the sports thing on my still camera, the sports setting, and you could see back and forth that it was obviously moving. But we've never been able to explain it away. Like, we're always looking for that mundane explanation, and it doesn't make any sense that just one would move while others stay still. And like I said, they're not always hanging in the same spot. It's not always the same kind of herbs. But it happened every single time we were there. So during this clip, George is sitting next to the door, and he's kind of just sitting there feeling around the door for some sort of airflow that might be causing this one bundle of herbs to spin. And Penny and I are trying to be quiet, walking around the room, and we have to announce everything we do, because if we make a floorboard squeak, we have to, when we're listening to it days later, be able to understand that that was something we did and not something paranormal. So you'll hear us explaining that, I'm walking around the room, I'm looking over here, and in between all of us discussing where could this be coming from, we caught a faint EVP. So you're going to hear us talking, and in between, I amped up the whisper. So maybe you might be able to make out a word or two. It's very short, and there's actually 2 of them in this one clip. And again, I'll play it 3 times, so hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
And around the window, and nothing's moving. That's interesting.
I'm going to walk over to the door and just see if I feel a draft around the door, since we know there's holes around this door. See, I would think if it were coming through the fireplace or something like that, it would affect the whole room.
And around the window, and nothing's moving. That's interesting.
I'm going to walk over to the door and just see if I feel a draft around the door, since we know there's holes around this door. See, I would think if it were coming through the fireplace or something like that, it would affect the whole room.
And around the window, and nothing's moving. That's interesting.
I'm going to walk over to the door and just see if I feel a draft around the door, since we know there's holes around this door. See, I would think if it were coming through the fireplace or something like that, it would affect the whole room.
So the very first one, all of us agreed that it sounds like a female voice saying "good girl," which is funny because it says that after George talks. But the consensus of the whole team was that one, she's saying "good girl." The second one, it's just a 1-syllable whisper, and every time I hear it, I hear something different. Like tonight, it sounded like it could be "look," which would make sense because we're all walking around looking for some source, and it could be her saying, "Hey, I'm here, look at me." Who knows? But I've also heard "good." It's something with the O, the long O sound, or the, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's the Allen kitchen. Like I said earlier, Mordeke is definitely an active location. So my next story is about a private home up in Creedmoor, and the owner of this home who has moved out to Arizona since then, but he was a CHAPS member. So he came to our meetup group, and he was interested in us coming out and investigating his house because he, like me, was sensitive, but he was a bit beyond my abilities at that point. He knew who his spirit guide was, and he had conversations with ghosts, and he was interesting. And when the two of us were together, he kind of amplified me, and he said I did the same for him. So somehow we were on the same level, and we amplified each other's abilities. So the first time we went to this house, it's a big, beautiful house, over 100 years old. And we were in his dining room doing an EVP session, and we'd already had some experiences through the night, like firsthand experiences, hearing noises and that sort of thing, like in other rooms where everybody who was there was in the same room, and we all heard footsteps in another room, that sort of thing. So we're asking if anybody is going to communicate with us through our recording. And we ended up getting 3 answers. One was not anybody else living who was in the room. One was him, and one was me. So I'm going to play this.
Or is there someone else in the study who is going to converse with us?
Yes.
Yes. Or is there someone else in the study who is going to converse with us?
Yes.
Yes. Or is there someone else in the study who is going to converse with us?
Yes.
Yes.
So you hear 3 affirmative answers. The first one was nobody in the room. The second one was the homeowner. And I remember distinctly, he and I both were nodding at the same time, and he said yes, and I said he is. And it does sound like the whisper is a male whisper. So that gave me a little bit of validation when I heard that not only were we both very positive that there was somebody else with us, but I picked up that it was a male. So that was cool. We took the meetup group there so many times. He loved showing off that house, and not just because it was paranormal, but because he and his partner had bought it and like restored it. And it was just this beautiful old Victorian house up there. And that was one of those places where we had to make everybody in the meetup group sign a confidentiality agreement, because we did not want that becoming, the old haunted house in Creedmoor that everybody wanted to stop traffic to see at Halloween. And I still keep in touch with him on Facebook. Like I just adore him. He was such a good guy. So my last EVP is a place called Kendale Cinema that is no longer open down in Sanford. They brought us in after they had a few local groups come in, and they had actually, this is their words, not mine. They brought in a couple of voodoo priestesses to try to clear the place out. And even after that, they were still having things happen. And this place was wild. Like, this was one of the few places where I got so creeped out that I tried to hide behind George, because I was sure somebody was coming toward me. And I was trying to ignore this feeling, and it just kept getting closer and closer. And there were 3 of us behind the stage curtain. And I was on the right side, George was in the middle, and one of the other investigators, who's a female, was on the other side of George. And I moved in between the 2 of them because I just could not escape this feeling that somebody was getting close to me, and they were not nice. And George was like, "I've never seen you act like that before." And I said, you don't understand. This thing is intense. And then we moved from that area to the out into the seats in the front of the house. And I ended up having somebody pull my hair to the point where the other female investigator who was sitting behind me saw my hair move. And I was cold, and we put a probe thermometer next to me, and the air around me was 2 degrees cooler than the rest of the room. And it was whatever was there was very happy to see me, apparently. But before any of that happened, we started with the whole group in the manager's office at the front of the building, and we did one group EVP session there, and then we split into smaller groups so we could tackle this big building a little bit faster. And in this front manager's office, because it was our first EVP session of the night, we went around the room after we hit record and we say who we are. So we have voice recognition. So when people are listening later, they know exactly who was in the room and they can recognize those voices and attach a name to them. So, I would say, I'm Nikki. George would say, this is George. Our skeptic said his name. And then after he said his name, he started to intro the EVP session. So he says, EVP session number 1. We're in Miss Cat's office. And when I was listening back later, this is what I heard.
EVP session number 1, Walter D.
I'm going to turn it up, but it's probably loud enough.
EVP session number 1, Walter D.
One more time.
EVP session number 1, Walter D.
Now, I know I said the first one was my favorite from the Mordeke house. This is my all-time favorite. This is a Class A EVP. It is loud and clear. And somebody wanted to make sure he introduced himself after the whole group had gone around the room introducing ourselves. And everybody's sure he says Walter. We know he says Walter P. P as in Paul or whatever. And this got validated when we took it back to the owner of the cinema. They were surprised. And then when they told us the story, they're like, well, actually, we're probably not surprised that he's still hanging around. There was a man who had some mental disabilities who absolutely loved that cinema. And he didn't work there, but they let him be a greeter there because that's basically all he wanted to do was just stand at the door, hold the door open for people and tell everybody hello as they walked in. And they were like, he was a good guy and that brought him joy. So we just let him do it. He didn't want to work here. He didn't want any money for it. He just wanted to come and say hi to everybody. And it turns out his name was Walter P. So we just got this wonderful validation, and that is the clearest EVP I've ever gotten. And it's got this weird cartoonish tinge to it. So it makes me smile no matter how many times I listen to it. It makes me smile. He was still greeting everybody even after he passed. So that's it. Whoops. There we go. That's all the stories, just to kind of go over how my perspective has changed since this is about my evolution. I had a lot of fear as a child, and then I was absolutely terrified when I was 16. And then I decided that I would rather understand things than be afraid. And that's a theme that's run through my life. When I was a child, I was scared to death of thunderstorms, and I'd hide under my bed when I was like 4 years old. And now I'm a meteorologist. Like if it scares me, with the exception of spiders, if it scares me, I want to understand it. So I expose myself to as much information about it as possible. And then I decided that books weren't enough. And I went out and I found some mentors and fellow experiencers. And not only did I start to understand how to control everything, but it also opened me up to the possibility of using energy to heal, and precognition and telepathy, and just a whole wider world than what I had grown up experiencing. And my attitude is just never stop learning. So I'm still buying books. I have more books than I can read, but I'm a bookaholic. And every time I see a new one, I have to have it. So I have 5 bookshelves in this office full of books. Some are about the weather. Most of them are about paranormal issues and parapsychology. I listen to podcasts. I watch documentaries. I do investigations. And then while I was listening to podcasts, I realized that paranormal podcasters either assume that no scientists are looking into these things, or they think that they used to look into it. Like they talk about the Ryan Research Center as it's something that happened in the past, and when it was a part of Duke, and it's over with now. But we know the Ryan Research Center is still active, and they're in Durham, and I'm friends with the executive director. Like, so I was like, somebody has to tell these people and the rest of the world that scientists and researchers, there are some that take this seriously and look into this. So I started my own podcast, and I launched it exactly 1 year ago today. So happy anniversary to the Peep podcast. And I'm still evolving because I'm using the podcast as an excuse to talk to these researchers that I would not be able to talk to otherwise. They wouldn't give me the time of day. But if I'm going to give them a platform to talk about their research, then they'll happily come on and have these conversations because they want people to know that there are people like them who are taking these things seriously and trying to find scientific explanations for them. So the podcast is a combination of those conversations, as well as just everyday people coming on and telling their stories about their own paranormal experiences, which is why it's called People Experiencing Everyday Paranormal. And the tagline is Science plus Sci. So that would be how you can find me. And I'm going to stop talking now and give anybody who wants to ask me a question a chance to ask. And thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Nikki. So we are, that was great information, great presentation. I am in the chat window, so if you have a question that you would like to ask Nikki, please type it in the chat window and I'll read it back to Nikki and she can answer for everyone. That way we can have it recorded in our recording and other people can enjoy the share as well. All right, so first question here, was there ever any time that you helped fix something paranormal?
Yes, there were a few times actually. The house that had the growling in the wall, that's the best way to describe that one, with all the animals. We ended up bringing a professional medium back to the house. It was somebody that I knew and I trusted her to be able to do this. And as soon as we got to the house, she said, I'm going to need your help. And I had never had this experience before. So I was like, what kind of help do you need? And she said, I'm going to work on the inside. She said, there seems to have been, in her words, a portal opened by the use of the Ouija board. There wasn't just one thing in the house. There were several things in the house. And she said, I'm going to smudge and bless the house and drive them away and close the portal. What I need you to do is stand outside the house. And if you sense anything trying to escape, push them back in. And my brain is going, say what? So, but I did it because she said, you can do this. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. So George followed her around the house because he was curious how she was going to do it. And he promised he'd keep his mouth shut and just observe. And I stood outside with the homeowner. It was just the lady of the house at the time. The husband was gone that day. And I was having a conversation with her about, this is all about intention. Like once we clear this house, it's up to you to keep it clear. You have to only allow love and light in this house. And as I'm having this conversation with her, we're standing on the back deck and I'm drawn to the right side of the house. So I go to the edge of the deck and I look over, and of course I don't see anything, but I know there's something there. And I just mentally like visualize pushing whatever it is back into the house. And then I go back to the conversation. And that was the only time it happened. And when we were all done and we were kind of talking to Fran alone, the medium, she said, did you feel anything at any point? And I told her what happened. And she said, you got it. Like you could do this. So that was the first time I ever experienced anything like that and helped. And then since then, I have gone in and saged and blessed a few homes. And we were told afterwards that it worked and they didn't have any problems anymore. And I actually had a friend of mine whose mother had something going on in her condo, and they brought me over. She had done an archangel, my friend had done an archangel class, and she was like, we're going to use Saint Michael the Archangel to send whatever it is across. And I was like, okay, I'll help. And she sent me some, pages from her workbook and asked me to read them. And I got there and we talked to her mom for a while, and I got some stories about what was going on and who they thought it was, and walked around the house, and I did feel like there was something there. And so when we were ready to do it, she goes, okay, are you ready? And I said, sure. And she said, okay, let's go stand over here. And I said, okay. And then she just stared at me, and I'm like, what are you staring at me for? And she goes, well, you're going to do it, right? And I said, well, you're the one who took the class. And she goes, no, I sent you that stuff because I don't feel comfortable doing it. And so I did what the pages told me to do. And we did the process, and I felt the energy in the room shift, and she did too. She looked at me and she's like, wow. And I said, okay, that wasn't just me. And that was over a year ago. And I've asked her several times since, has your mom had any more experiences? And she said no. So apparently I have helped somebody cross over, which was kind of cool. So.
Okay. Oh man, that's excellent. Well, I think that may have been, were you reading the chat box? Did you see that question?
Mhm.
Okay. That was
No.
about, have you had well, the question before, do you explore near-death experiences?
Yes, that was actually the most recent episode that came out last Wednesday of my podcast, was talking to Robert and Suzanne Mays about their 40 plus years of near-death experience research. And I've always been fascinated in it. I've read a lot of stories of that, and I've seen them do talks, and a few other people do talks on the subject. So I was really excited to have them on my podcast. It's actually something that I had my own near-death experience in 2016. I was driving down a 2-lane road going 55 miles an hour, and somebody came in the opposite direction, crossed the center line, and hit me. And that episode was the first time I talked about it publicly, because I felt comfortable enough with them. And I really feel like that's a message that needs to get out, is that near-death experiences are basically proof that the consciousness continues after death. And that's kind of the question that everybody's asking, whether they're talking about near-death experiences or trying to converse with ghosts or talking to a medium. Like, that's, everybody just wants some confirmation that there's more to the world than what we experience in our physical bodies.
Excellent. Excellent. Now I'm going to read this question, but they ended it with never mind, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. And so I consider you an expert in your field. And I guess the question is kind of posed in a way speaking about mediums. So you're a scientist medium, and from what my observation is from the stories that I've heard. So have you ever had an expert medium, which I consider you an expert in your field? So that's not a contradiction to what you've been presenting. Have you ever had an expert medium come with you to clear and heal the place?
Yeah, that was the situation that I explained. That's probably why they said never mind, because I was talking about doing the first clearing with a professional medium.
Okay, that sounded like
yeah.
what you were talking.
Yeah, and I do want to say one thing, and it's part of the evolution of me. When I wrote the book 2 years ago, I titled it "Please Don't Call Me Psychic," and in the first chapter, the introduction, I explain that that's something I've always shied away from, because when you're called a psychic, people want you to predict their future and they want you to get in touch with their great Aunt Bessie. And there's expectations that go along with that word that I have always shied away from. But in the past few months, I've started to embrace that. That's like the last part of me that I haven't embraced. I have always had precognition. I've had telepathy. I've obviously had experiences with spirits. And maybe because I was raised Catholic, there's always been a part of me that's like, don't cross that line. Don't go there. And I actually had my psychic friend, Tiffany, who's based up in Minnesota, and she was on my podcast several months ago. She was doing a reading special, and I said, okay, I'll give you $25 to give me a reading, help me figure out financially, like how to get out of the debt that I'm in, because I just spent a lot of money trying to fix some issues on the house. And the answer, it was called a Get Real tarot spread. That's what she was calling it. And the answer came back, honey, you don't need my help. The cards are telling me that you really are, you get messages from spirit, just like me and John Edward and everybody else, but you don't trust yourself, and you need to trust yourself. So that's what I'm working on now, is getting better at trusting myself.
Okay, thank you. So it is 9:19. We've got a couple more minutes for questions.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, here's another question. Do you ever find that spirits tend to come through electricity?
I might need some clarification on that. Just I can feel things, like it feels electrical sometimes if it's really strong, but I'm not quite sure I understand come through electricity.
Okay, I'll ask that questioner. So electric
Okay.
episodes like lights switching on and off, stoves turning on and off.
Yes, definitely. I've had those experiences myself with the phantom hand turning the light switch off and then the lights coming back on by themselves after I screamed. There have been a lot of investigations that part of the reason that the people called us in was because of electrical issues, not just lights going on and off, but there was one couple who lived in a single wide mobile home, and they had a lot of activity. And when they started arguing, things like the light bulb above them would explode. So they were adding energy to the activity, and that's how it would manifest. And that was one of the places that I smudged and blessed, and they said that it worked. So I was very happy to be able to help them, because they had a small child, and it was really starting to worry them that the child was going to be affected by something like that happening.
Okay. I had another one. Let's see here. I had one that I was asking what was the most beautiful experience you've had?
That's a hard one. um, you know, I actually did an EVP session in my great grandparents' house. They built this house. It was a Sears and Roebuck kit home, and I think my great grandfather died in the house. It was when I was like super young, so I don't even remember what he looked like other than from pictures. And then my great grandmother had Parkinson's, and she had a stroke, and she fell down the stairs, and she told her daughter, my grandma, if you take me to the hospital, I'm going to haunt you, because she wanted to die in her home and she knew she was going to die. But they took her to the hospital because that's what you do when somebody has a stroke. And she died in the hospital. And both of them are still in that house. They're very active. And she does things like open up the drawers in the kitchen and all that stuff. And he is active down in the cellar, which is where his workshop was. And so a few years back, I took my recorder up there when I went up for a visit, and I sat in the house and I did an EVP session. And I had a conversation with grandma, just telling her I missed her and all of that. And when I listened back to the recording, after I said, "Grandma, are you here with me?" I got a very weak hello, which to most people that wouldn't be a big deal, but to me that was pretty beautiful.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. There was one question, and I'm not sure if I'll just ask it and you answer it as you feel.
Okay.
Have you ever had a physical experience? And the questioner had a paralyzation incident. So have you ever had a physical experience like mine, becoming paralyzed after the voice? So I'm not sure if that's enough information for you to be able to answer the question.
I think it is. I can say I have not had a paralyzation experience. I haven't had, I've never experienced sleep paralysis. I've never been paralyzed by fear, and I've never had anything cause paralyzation for me.
Okay. It is 9:24. I was wondering, Nikki, do you have any last thoughts for us in closing?
I just go back to the theme of my life is never stop learning. So if you're interested in something, whether it's something that you're afraid of or just fascinated with, anything that sparks you, that lights you up, learn as much as you can about it. It's hard to say you're an expert in the field of the paranormal, but I don't know as much as I do because, that's a lot of negatives. I know what I know because I ask questions of the people who know more than me, and I read the books, and I listen to the people who are as expert as they can be. And a lot of times these questions just lead to more questions. The answers lead to more questions, and that's why people are researching it. And I don't want to lose the mystery of it all. Like, I don't want to know so much that there's no more mystery in the world, but I don't think with paranormal and parapsychology that that's even a possibility.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone. It's about 9:26, and I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. Remember to mark your calendar for the 7th of for 7 p.m. on November the 4th. The details are forthcoming, but it's going to involve an expert from California accessing higher consciousness through the use of a specific kind of sacred geometry. So look at our website for more information on that, and and our other various media channels. If you're not part of our newsletter, it would be great to have you on it, and that way we can get plenty of information to you. We don't overload your inbox, and we're here to bring information to you. So thanks everybody for attending tonight, and we'll see you at our next meeting.
Thank you, everybody.